For those who don't know, it has been 9 whole years since the original version of Persona 5 released. In other words, a year longer than the gap between Persona 4 and 5, and 3 whole years longer than the gap between Eternal Punishment and Persona 3. That's a long time, and fans are getting impatient. So, why the wait? I believe there are 3 major reasons behind the absence of Persona 6. Note, believe. This video is speculative and should not be taken as hard fact or even soft fact. I do not have an uncle that works at Atlus. Reason 1. Firstly, while a lot of fans are viewing this as a 9-year gap between new games, Atlus probably just isn't. Why? Because of 2024's Persona 3 Reload, and now 2020X's Persona 4 Revival. Persona 3 Reload isn't like Fez, Portable, Golden, or Royal. It's not an updated re-release, but for all intents and purposes, a brand new game using a brand new engine with brand new assets. Atlus's timeline probably doesn't look like this, but this. For them, the gap between major non-re-release Persona titles is 8 years, the same as the gap between Persona 4 and 5. Now, I'm pretty sure Persona 6 isn't going to be delayed all the way to 2032, but the space between Persona 5 and 6 probably doesn't look as daunting to Atlus as it does to us. Reason 2. It is a plain and simple truth that bigger games are taking longer to make. People expect better 3D models and textures, larger worlds, and more in-depth interactions and features, and therefore, games are bigger, more detailed, and simply require more effort to complete. Look at, say, Pokemon, for God's sake. For the first time in, gasp, years, Game Freak didn't release major titles back to back. If it was possible for them to have churned out Legends EA for 2024, they sure as hell would have. Reason 3. I think Persona 6's development is just not necessarily going great. As you may know, the director for Personas 3 to 5, Ashino, moved away from Atlus's P Studio, where Persona is developed, in order to work on Metaphor ReFantazio. Instead, the Persona games are currently being created by the team that made Persona 5 Royal, Persona 3 Reload, and that game's episode Aegis. While Royal's third semester is generally beloved, Reload, the first full game they created, is a bit more controversial. As a remake of a very beloved classic, however, that's not unsurprising. Despite the naysayers, it sold well, and most people generally liked it. Episode Aegis, on the other hand, oh boy, I don't think I've seen a single positive review of that game, and one pretty unanimous agreement is that the writing, in contrast to the original version of the game, is dreadful. Now, I think this is in part due to executive meddling. Some of the characters, Yukari, were toned down so they were more palatable to a wider audience, which is generally never a move that ends well. But I think for a lot of people, it exposed the flaws with the new P Studio's writing. Looking at Reload's new scenes, while the light-hearted, fluffier ones all check out, most of the more serious ones are hit or miss, with a fair few misses. I think there's a good chance, upon seeing the negative reaction to episode Aegis, the studio higher-ups speed-read what existed of Persona 6 at that stage, and found it lacking. And if there's one thing Atlus is not going to accept, it's Persona 6 being bad. That game is so anticipated, and Persona is such an important flagship franchise of theirs, its sucking would be catastrophic. I think there's a good chance this game is going through major revisions, And that's why we're getting Persona 4 Revival instead. Now that I've finished talking about where Persona 6 is, the next question is, what is it going to be like? Frankly, there's no point speculating about plot, characters, or even gameplay, but I do have a couple more high-level theories about the game. Firstly, a combination of some by now outdated leaks and a little bit of common sense makes it fairly easy to conclude that it's almost certainly going to be the Green game. Secondly, real life has a huge effect on the Persona games, and not just their development. Persona 5 was initially envisioned as a globe-trotting adventure, but in the wake of the Japanese earthquakes, the developers pivoted to something that celebrated the Japanese spirit instead. So, what's a big, in real-life event that happened between the development of Persona 5 and 6? That's right, COVID. I would be extremely surprised if the pandemic didn't influence Persona 6's writing. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Persona 6 is going to be set in 2020 with the final boss being humanity's unwillingness to mask. But I do think certain elements of pandemic life will be baked into the game's themes. Social isolation and digital connections defined life during that era, especially for teenagers and children who have less life experience in general. And honestly, isolation and online relationships are two things I can easily see Atlus making a game about. Another hot topic, which COVID affected, is the environment. There were a lot of slightly eco-fashy posts of weeds growing in airports and what have you floating around once self-isolating hit full swing, and the worsening effects of climate change are hugely important for a lot of younger people. Because as much as I'd love another adult cast in a Persona game, I don't think that's happening in Persona 6, and therefore Atlus is gonna care about what teenagers care about. And what do both the environment and digital technology have in common? An association with the colour green. While Persona 6 isn't necessarily going to have a technology versus environment story with themes of isolation and loneliness, it would be fairly topical if it did. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.